My name is Tracy Flannery, and I'm delighted to be the chair of the Board of Trustees of the Nantucket Athenaeum. And on behalf of the board and on behalf of Ann Scott, our executive director and head librarian, we want to welcome you to the fourth and final Geschke lecture presentation for 2022. As some of you may know, the Geschke lectures have been going on since 2005, when Ann and Chuck Geschke had the foresight and the generosity to match a grant for the National Endowment for the Humanities and allow us to put together this speaker series. And since that time, we've all been the beneficiaries of that. The Athenaeum has expanded its programming by offering events such as tonight, and we've all benefited by broadening our horizons by attending these lectures for almost 20 years now. So thanks to the Geschkes for that. Sometime in the doldrums of the winter, my good friend and neighbor in Boston, Barbara Eisenson, and I were talking about the Geschke series, and we thought how fun it would be to introduce two of our favorite organizations, the New England Aquarium, where Barbara's deeply involved, and the Nantucket Athenaeum. And so we're delighted to say that this presentation is the culmination of that seed event back 6 months ago where we all were on a Zoom call, and really want to welcome you guys to being a part of the Geschke lecture series. So on that note, I'm going to introduce the president and CEO of the New England, get to my notes here, she's got quite a resume. The president and CEO of the New England Aquarium, Vicki Spruill. I will let Vicki fill you in on what she and her team are doing at the New England Aquarium, but prior to joining the aquarium, Vicki was the president and CEO of the Council on Foundations, the largest association of philanthropic grant-making organizations. And before that, she was the president and CEO of Ocean Conservancy, a science-based advocacy organization devoted to our oceans. She founded the Trash Free. I told her she's picked like the hardest things to say. The Trash Free Seas Alliance. Try that 3 times fast. But she founded the Trash Free Seas Alliance, and was the founding director of CWeb. And in her spare time, and trust me, I cut her resume way back. She helped to found Compass, which empowers scientists to better engage in public discourse on environmental issues. So. On that note, I'm going to pass the mic, over to Vicki and let her introduce the rest of her team. And thanks so much for coming. It's
Thank you,
a pleasure
Tracy.
to have you here. We can't wait to.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think I'm on. Great. Since I have a lot of talking to do, I am going to use the mic. Well, first of all, I'm delighted. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone at the Athenaeum. For welcoming us. Thank you, Nantucket, for welcoming us. Thank you for spending your Tuesday evening here with us. First of all, I have to confess, I am a Nantucket homeowner and a part-time resident and have loved this place for 40 years, and I care a lot about everything that happens here on this island. We're all attracted here for different reasons, but I think we all feel, and of course that's my phone, we all feel a special connection to this place because we care about not only its beauty, but animals and their ecosystems and the whole environment. Actually, whales played a big part in my taking this job at the New England Aquarium. I was here that summer of 2018 and observed pods of whales off the beach in Tom Nevers. I don't know how many of you saw those whales during that period of time. Yeah, it was magical, and both tourists and lifelong residents of Nantucket were so just amazed by that. And I had just previously been approached by the aquarium for this job, and I came out here to kind of contemplate about whether or not this was a thing for me to do. And when I saw those whales, I think they were calling me. And so I took it as a sign, and here I am. Our right whale research program, as it turns out, is one of the oldest and most well-respected programs actually in the world. We have equally deep expertise in turtles and in sharks, which we will get to, I promise. But I sort of want to, how many of you have been to the New England Aquarium? Yay. Okay, so yeah, the staff definitely had to raise their hands. Before I get into what we really are, and there's more to us than meets the eye, and more to us than is that facility on Central Wharf, which is obviously the heart and soul of our institution. I just want to remind us a few facts about the ocean. The ocean is truly the lifeblood of our planet. Every other breath we take is thanks to the ocean. It feeds us, it nurtures us, it shapes our weather. It serves as a buffer for climate change by absorbing much of the excess carbon we're putting in the atmosphere and producing. So we need to be taking care of that ocean if we want the ocean to be taking care of us. And that's really where the New England Aquarium comes in. And we do 4 main things. So the aquarium itself, as I said, is really our heart and soul. It's where people of all ages come to be educated and inspired. But that's not the end of the game. That's really just the beginning of the journey, because we hope that by becoming educated and inspired, you'll take action out in the world to better understand what's happening to our ocean. So of course, we advance animal and ocean health. We do that both for the animals we have in our facility, but also the 15,000 of them actually, but also for animals in the wild, and you'll hear from our scientists a bit more about that. We inspire and educate advocates so that they'll take action to protect this blue planet of ours. We partner to build resilient communities, particularly in Boston, where we physically sit at the water's edge and where climate change is really impacting that waterfront. And we're working to make it more resilient, more inclusive, and more accessible. And then we work with industry to promote responsible use of the ocean. And we are working with the shipping industry, with obviously the fishing industry, with wind providers, to make sure that we are, because we believe that we balance, we believe that industry and humans and the ocean can all coexist. So Central Wharf is that perch from which we talk about our community work. In Quincy, we have one of the largest sea turtle hospitals in the world, where we rehabilitate sea turtles that, mostly Kemp's Ridleys, but also loggerheads and green turtles that get caught in the hook of Cape Cod when the weather turns cold. We rehabilitate them, study them over the winter months, and release them in the summer. And that's been a long-standing program. And then in our Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life, that's where we conduct scientific research that you'll hear more about today. And the research we're doing is really helping to provide solutions to the threats facing the ocean. And our learning about sharks is a big part of that. So I could go on and on about the wonders of the New England Aquarium, but I know you didn't come here to hear me talk. You want to hear from 2 of our scientists. I'm going to start by introducing John Mandelman, Dr. John Mandelman, who is the head of our Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life and our chief scientist at the Anderson Cabot Center. And then I'm going to introduce Dr. Nick Whitney, who is a senior scientist and chair of our Anderson Cabot Center, and he's got a good title too, Tracy, of our Fisheries Science and Emerging Technologies program. But really, they're both shark guys. So John and Nick, welcome, and I'm glad we're here to have this opportunity. I'm going to start with the elephant or the shark in the room. Tell us how you got involved in this work.
First off, thank you. Again, I want to echo Vicki's thanks for including us, having us here. It's really an honor and a privilege. Thanks, Barbara, for initiating the whole process, and thanks to everybody for coming out. I'll start, and then I'll hand it off to Nick. So like every kid that was born and raised in New York City, I became a shark biologist. Doesn't make a lot of sense. I grew up right across from Central Park, but when I was about 3 years old, my parents bought a place on the South Shore of Long Island, and I ended up spending my summers out there right on the water. And very early on, I was seining and fishing and basically becoming a very muddy, salty beach kid, and ended up falling in love with fishing, falling in love, getting scuba certified very young. We were talking about scuba diving earlier. And then one thing led to another, and ended up making a career out of this. I think probably the shark piece, and I just want to maybe articulate that my role now at the aquarium is overseeing the Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life, which, as Vicki alluded to, is our ocean conservation science wing, so to speak. It's part of the New England Aquarium. It's not a separate entity. It's very much part of our fabric and what we do. And we've been conducting research at the aquarium going back many years, going back to almost when we were founded in 1969. We've been conducting applied research, and we'll get into what that means as we go along today. But I ended up on that path, and I'm now representing the group and leading it. I don't get to do as much fun in the field research anymore as Dr. Whitney does, but I have to live vicariously through him and other scientists that we have a few in the audience today. So I think the shark piece was Jaws. So like everybody, who was around at that point, my parents watched Jaws in 1975, proceeded not to let me go in the water for a few years after that. And then I watched it when I was way too young. I think I watched it when I was like 6. And that was a huge mistake. And then, of course, I went and repeated that and showed my daughters Jaws when they were like 4 and 6. And I wish I had showed a picture of their horrified expressions, as they were watching the movie and still, loving it. But a lot of us actually that got into sharks and started studying them were influenced by that movie. So we like to say that it's actually had a huge effect on shark conservation in a positive way. So that was my story. Love Jaws, love the ocean, and got involved in it that way.
Thanks. I'm Nick Whitney. I grew up in Michigan, born and raised, like half the population of Nantucket, apparently, judging from the stickers on the cars I see. Lots of University of Michigan fans here. Go Blue, yeah. I also was terrified of sharks growing up in Michigan. We would go on family vacations to the ocean, and I would watch from the beach while my family swam and read books from the beach, and I started reading about sharks to try and figure out how not to get eaten when I went in the water, and eventually discovered they were really cool, and then had a chance to go to a school in Michigan called Albion College, small liberal arts school, where there was a professor studying sharks in the Florida Keys. Went down to the Keys with him as an intern. The first trip down there, we had SeaWorld come out with us. There was a manatee that had gotten lost that needed to be rescued, and the USGS came out and asked if we could help them find this manatee and ask if there was anybody who could do any tracking. And I was the shark tracker kid, so I got to then track a manatee that we caught and put on our boat and drove back to Key West so it could be rehabilitated. 100 things happened on that trip that just made me think marine biology was absolutely the most exciting, coolest thing anyone could ever do, and I didn't stand a chance of picking another career after that trip. So from there, was in Hawaii where I did my graduate work. That didn't disabuse me of the notion that sharks and research were really cool. That was a great experience. Plenty of sharks in Hawaii, lots of diving. And then did a postdoc and was in research at Mote Marine Laboratory in Florida for several years before joining the aquarium. So that's how I got my start.
Awesome. So we all know there are many kinds of sharks, and I know you can rattle them off, and we hope you will, Nick, but there are certain species that are, to be serious here for a minute, that are drawing more attention, particularly in Nantucket over these last many weeks. And yesterday, the hammerhead, and today a great white. So I'm just wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about why we're seeing more sharks right now, or are we?
Right, so I think the answer is we are seeing more sharks, but it's mainly because people are getting more pictures of them and able to distribute those pictures more. I was telling someone earlier today that 20 years ago, if somebody saw a shark at the beach, like say that hammerhead that we've probably all seen the video of from a couple days ago, that would just be a cool story that they told their friends and family about, and that would probably be the end of it. Whereas now, someone sees that hammerhead, they have the video on their phone and it goes viral, and we've all seen it within 24 hours. Millions of people have seen it. So I think a lot of the increased shark sightings are just that. They're increased sightings, but it doesn't mean there's necessarily more sharks coming around. As Vicki mentioned, some people are surprised to find out that there are a lot more than just white sharks around Nantucket waters. And I think we came up with like 15 species that can be found around Nantucket, either near shore or slightly offshore. And yes, I'm happy to try and name as many as I can. Smooth dogfish, spiny dogfish, sand tiger sharks, sandbar sharks. So sand tiger sharks are probably the ones that have been biting people off Long Island over the past month. We have those sharks here as well. Sandbar sharks are probably the most common shark around Nantucket waters, and we're doing some projects on those sandbar sharks. If you get further offshore, you start to get porbeagle sharks, mako sharks, thresher sharks, blue sharks, basking sharks, which are some of the biggest, second largest fish in the world, which is a plankton feeder. On the south side, as we mentioned, there's hammerhead sharks, both scalloped hammerhead and smooth hammerhead. Tiger sharks will occasionally come this far north as Nantucket waters. Whale sharks, the biggest fish in the sea, can actually be found offshore of Nantucket waters occasionally, another filter feeder. And we at the New England Aquarium are actually studying several of those different species. We do a lot of different work for different purposes. Oh,
Angel sharks.
angel sharks. But is that a shark or a ray? White sharks and duskies. Thank you. Thank you. And also, while I'm introducing the species, I'd like to also introduce a couple of our graduate students, Caroline Colados over here, and Jesse Kittle. Jesse right here. They've both been doing some work around the island here this summer, tagging some of the local sharks.
So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that program and what they're doing and.
Yeah, so we've been tagging sandbar sharks around the island for the past couple summers, led by Caroline over here. And what we're trying to do is find out what is happening with sharks around Nantucket. We know very little about what's going on with sharks in Nantucket waters because no one's been monitoring the sharks ever. There's tagging that goes on obviously off the Cape and in other areas. And what we're trying to do is start monitoring sharks with something that we call the Shark Easy Pass system. This is actually acoustic telemetry, but it works the same way as the Easy Pass. So when you're driving down the highway and you drive through a toll booth, and that toll booth detects your Easy Pass in your car, we do it the same way with sharks, except that this is the toll booth right here. This is an acoustic receiver. We have these stationed out at various places in the ocean. We anchor them to the bottom, and they listen for sharks that are carrying the Shark Easy Pass, which here's an example of one right here. This is an acoustic transmitter that we attach either externally to the shark, or we like to do surgery and implant the tag inside the shark, which leaves a much cleaner fin and we think a much happier shark. It also means that the tag will stay in longer and will tell us where the sharks went for up to 10 years. These tag batteries can last. As long as we have receivers in the water, they're actually out and listening for them. So this is work that we're just getting started with, just implementing, and we're trying to build a Easy Pass shark corridor, if you will, both around Nantucket waters, Nantucket Sound, and further south. We also have some of these receivers that we have out in the offshore wind lease areas that we're using to monitor what's the impact of those wind turbines and that construction on sharks, tunas, and billfishes out there. We're tagging them before, during, and after construction to look at the impacts. And then the last thing I'll just mention is the same technology can also detect our sea turtles that we rehabilitate at New England Aquarium. We have a huge sea turtle rehab program. We release those sea turtles into the ocean. We assume and hope that they do well, but we need to monitor that and really find out. And the same technology is also used by researchers up and down the coast, including our friends at the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy and the state. So we can detect, right now when their Easy Pass sharks swim around Nantucket, there's nothing listening for them. And we're trying to get our receivers out, and we collaborate with them and share data back and forth. So.
I will just add on to that, going back to Vicky's original question. So one of the things we've learned through acoustic telemetry and other research investigations that we and many colleagues have done is that even though Nick is absolutely right that the communication mechanisms we have these days through social media and taking quick and easy pictures on our phones allow us to transmit information so quickly, but in actuality as well, we are seeing recovery of certain shark populations, and the white shark is a great example of that. They've been federally protected since 1997, and we've seen, even though the sharks that we see in the Outer Cape and Nantucket are usually those that are feeding on marine mammals, so they have to be above probably 8 to 9 feet, because that's when they shift from being fish eaters to marine mammal eaters. So they've been around. The result of that's the result of fisheries management restrictions for many years, and that's really a conservation victory. And while many people, I think, are absolutely justified in being concerned because there's a potentially aggressive animal out there, it's also a win for ocean health and conservation, and something that I think we all have to appreciate as something that we and many of us in the community and many people in the public have been fighting for. So that's a good thing. And a lot of these other sharks that we're seeing are coming up. There are protections of some of the things they eat. So when we see conservation wins and rebounds in some of what we call forage fish, like menhaden, or for those of you that fish, they're called menhaden or bunker, also called pogies. When those are plentiful, we see sharks coming up and eating them. And of course, we have an incredibly warm environment in the North Atlantic. The Gulf of Maine is warming at an unprecedented clip, faster than any water body on Earth. So we're seeing unpredictable patterns in where animals live, where they move. Our Easy Pass work that Nick alluded to, the work that Caroline is doing, that work is incredibly important in deciphering the new habitats that these animals live in. We only know the historical norms. We don't know where they're moving and living now. So we're trying to play catch up here so that we can get ahead of that and we can better protect and manage them. That's absolutely key. You can't protect something you don't know. If you don't know where it is, you can't protect it, right? If you don't understand the ocean, you can't solve its problems. So that's where we come in.
So just one further question about that. So, it seems like we're seeing more of these sharks in the near shore. Certainly that's been happening around here. Why is that? You kind of started to answer that.
I can start and then pass off to Nick. I think, one of the things, again, it comes down to, in many cases, food sources. First and foremost, these animals need to be in an environment where they can cope thermally, temperature-wise. And it is warmer. We're seeing a host of species come up more regularly that maybe used to be an anomaly, but now it's more routine. But when you've got a lot of food out there, and we're seeing so many bunker, on Long Island, Vicky, we talked about there are 6 bites. There's been 6 people bitten in the waters of Long Island this summer alone. A lot of that is because there's a lot of little bunker in the surf. These sharks are coming in really close to eat it. They get frenzied up from eating, and then they're incidentally taking a nip or two of a person's leg or of a wrist, and it's scary. Fortunately, nobody on Long Island of those 6 people have been badly hurt, but that's going to happen more frequently when there's more food and the temperatures are bringing animals all over the place. It gets unpredictable. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, the other thing I would add is just we are in the middle of the ocean out here. I mean, this is not just a little key that you can drive to, obviously. So sharks live in the ocean, and this is a great, Nantucket is almost like a really cool portal into what's going on out in the open ocean, and some of the species that you see out here are definitely coastal, but then you're also going to get occasional sightings of more pelagic species coming in close to shore because we are so far offshore. So an example being that hammerhead that we saw just a couple days ago. That shark was just doing very normal sharky stuff. There was chasing around a fish, catching it. I was excited for him that he caught that fish right there, but just perfectly normal behavior. There was another one a couple of weeks ago that was probably a sandbar shark or a couple of sandbar sharks chasing around a school of bait fish, and that created a big media frenzy as well. But again, biologically unremarkable, like sharks chasing and eating fish. That's exactly what they're supposed to do. So a lot of these things are just normal. and depending on your perspective, exciting things to see. But obviously it can be concerning with some of the larger sharks coming in, to the white sharks to feed on seals and things like that.
Say just a few more words about seals, because
Yeah,
they too have come back.
Right. So we know that the seal population has obviously been increasing quite a bit in recent years. Our cab driver who brought us over was talking about how he grew up here and never saw a seal until 30 years ago, and then maybe he saw like one or two or something like that. And then he's talking about how much the population has grown. And that, along with what appears to be a recovering white shark population, is creating the situation where you have white sharks coming in to feed on one of their favorite prey items. And occasionally that happens. Of course, the seals are coming in to shore and lining up on the beach, so that's going to bring the white sharks in closer to shore. So for that, we've just really been emphasizing public awareness as much as possible. We work with the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy to help vet the shark sightings that come from the public. There are a lot of sightings that are turned in every year to the Sharktivity app, and a lot of them are not white sharks. A lot of them are not sharks at all. Some of them are people just taking pictures of themselves down their bathing suit and sending those in as a prank, which I didn't know about that, and we don't encourage that at all. But we have our shark experts at the aquarium will be the first line of vetting those photos and figuring out, first of all, if they're a white shark, and then they'll go up on the Sharktivity app, which hopefully you all have on your phone. But if you don't, you can download it. You can turn on the alerts, and it will send you an alert every time there's a confirmed white shark sighting. It will also send you detections from some of the Conservancy's Easy Pass buoys that are actually live buoys. Some of these things will actually transmit the data immediately when a tagged shark swims by, and that will also go to the Sharktivity app as well.
And the closures have been useful.
Yeah, that's right. That's another thing that actually John was mentioning, is how the beach closures are also raising, obviously, awareness quite a bit. And you can debate whether or not if you close a beach for 2 hours and don't see a shark, that means the sharks are all gone. But it does get people's attention and just raises people's awareness that, like, look, this is not a swimming pool. When you go into the ocean, you need to be aware of your surroundings. Be on the lookout if there's schools of bait fish and birds working. Maybe don't swim right through the middle of that, because there's probably bigger fish and potentially sharks trying to feed there.
So I'm sensitive to time because I want to make sure we have a good half hour for questions. But John, I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit more about what else we're working on.
Sure. So more specifically about, and this includes the work that Nick is talking about with sharks and sea turtles, I think fundamentally the research that the New England Aquarium does, the Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life does, is, as I noted earlier, applied research. So we're trying to fill data gaps to answer very specific questions to make the oceans healthier, to find solutions. So a good example of that is, we may study where an animal lives, where it's moving, and then we can transmit that information directly to the managers that are managing that particular area of the ocean or a particular fishery, and that helps them shape their management protections, where they can and can't, where fishermen can and can't fish, where we might protect that habitat, what times of year those animals are there, things of that nature. We also do a lot of research that is trying to evaluate how we reduce risk for animals that live in the ocean. So mitigating risk comes down to things like fisheries. Nick, we mentioned in the introduction, and offshore wind. Nick mentioned that as well. There are different industry uses of the ocean. It's getting warm, and there's industries using the ocean. We want to make sure that we are holding those industries accountable, and that we're making sure that they are abiding by the best available science so that they can reduce their probability of negatively impacting the animals that are out there. So a lot of our work on sea turtles, on sharks, and their close relatives, we don't want to forget about the rays and the skates, which are also cartilaginous fish that we do a lot of studying of, as well as other fish. Nick mentioned tunas and billfish. We do a lot of work from the air. We monitoring and surveying these animals. We do a lot of work from boats surveying these animals. We do a lot of mathematical modeling back in the lab to understand and predict where these animals are moving by looking at their previous patterns. And we have projects in the Gulf of Maine and across the world. We have a program called the Marine Conservation Action Fund, which is funding different activities, research activities on imperiled species around the world. And we also have our own Blue Technology Incubator program where we're helping startups that are coming up with ocean-friendly solutions to challenges reach success and get the subsequent financing they need to get their technologies adopted. Those are just a small smattering of the things we do, but I would say our biggest areas of expertise, as Vicki noted earlier, scientifically around these animals, biologically, would be the sea turtles, the sharks and their relatives, and the North Atlantic right whale, as well as other large whales.
So with that, I think I'd like to open it up to the audience. I know you have a lot of questions. Yeah. Do you want to? Let's just start right here in the pink shirt.
Any sightings of the dolphins up here?
So the question is, are there
Dolphin
sightings
sightings.
of dolphins up here?
The answer is up in Nantucket waters, yes. I think there have been. There certainly have been a lot on Long Island. I know that for a fact. And harbor porpoise sightings certainly are frequent, I believe, in Nantucket waters. But I've heard that I'm sure everybody saw in the news that humpback whale that ended up breaching onto a vessel recently. We actually put out a statement, as did many other groups, just for mariners to mind your spacing. I will say that if you're near a whale, sometimes it's hard to predict exactly where that whale is going to be. It's going to come up where it's going to come up. You can't necessarily avoid it, but you should actively try to avoid its area wherever possible. But dolphins, we've been seeing a ton of them in coastal waters. They're feeding on the same things that the sharks and the whales are feeding on. Menhaden is like this beautiful, bountiful, it's got calorically high tissue. It's loaded with fat. It's a lot of protein, or a lot of fat and protein bang for their buck. So everybody loves to eat them, and fishermen love to get near them because usually underneath the menhaden are things that the fishermen want to catch.
Yes, in the back.
How do you implant your device in the belly of the shark?
Yeah, do we want to have Caroline?
The question is, how do we implant the tag in the belly of the shark?
So this is Caroline Collada, who actually lives on Nantucket and is doing the research, and so she's going to tell us in her own words.
So before I describe it, I want to say we go through like really rigorous permitting to be able to do this, and we go through state permitting as well as institutional animal care permitting, so that everything we do is humane and it's okay for the animal. I also lost my voice, so please just bear with me on that. But so what we do is we flip the shark over into tonic immobility, which is this coma-like state that they go in when they're upside down. You can probably see some pictures that will come through the slide that I can point to where we're actually, or not me, but someone else is actually doing surgery in the photo. And then if you imagine that sharks are kind of like a Twinkie. So if you imagine that their muscle is that dough, and then they have this abdominal cavity on the inside, which is that filling of the Twinkie, where all the organs are together. So when we flip the shark over, we then make a little insertion of a needle with lidocaine in it so that it numbs the area. We then wait for that to take effect, and then we just make a small incision, it's usually 2 to 3 centimeters long, into that abdominal Twinkie area. We slip a tag in, and then we just suture the animal shut, turn them over, and send them on their way. And the process is usually about a 3-minute surgery process, so it's pretty quickly, done pretty quickly, and we also time everything so that we know how long we're taking.
Thank you, Caroline. Other questions? Yes, right here in front.
So in the sharks in the area, you're obviously using those tags. Are you also using like PSAT and accelerometer tags as well to track, or is that just the primary way to go?
Do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, I love that question. Have we met? The question was, in addition to the acoustic telemetry, are you also using other tags like satellite tags or accelerometer tags? As a matter of fact, we are. Thank you. Yes, one of the tags that we use that's one of my favorite tags are our accelerometer tags. We put those externally on the fin. They look like this. They're in a float. Actually, here's one that's actually been on a shark, and we attach them to the fin. Inside they have a accelerometer tag implanted. An accelerometer is the same thing that you have in your smartphone or your smartwatch or your Fitbit. Instead of tracking your steps, we can track the shark's tail beats. We can see every tail beat it makes. We can track its pitch and posture, its depth, its temperature. It basically produces like a daily diary of second by second what that shark did. And what we've been using that for, we've been using it for a lot of things, including to study shark mating in the Florida Keys. Up around here, we've been using these tags on sandbar sharks to find out what happens to them after they're caught and released by fishermen. You see and hear a lot of people catching them, especially off the beach. And the assumption is always, we're doing catch and release, so they swim off and they all survive. But we know from our studies and other people's studies that depending on the species and the fisheries, they don't all survive. Many of them will die anyway from stress or injuries that they sustain. So it turns out it's tricky to find out how many of them actually live or die unless you can put a tag on them that tells you everything they do second by second. And we've done this with many species and many fisheries. Up here with sandbar sharks in the recreational fishery, we have tagged, Caroline, do you remember our final number? 67 sharks that we've tagged both on the Cape and here on Nantucket, applying these tags to find out if they survived or not. And our mortality rate was 0. Every single one survived, at least for short term. We normally monitor for just a few days with these. And that's when most of the mortalities, if they're going to happen, that's when they usually happen. We are using satellite tags on other species, not so much around Nantucket, but we're putting satellite tags out right now on porbeagle sharks that are caught in the trawl fishery to find out if they survive that. Jeff
Sea turtles.
Kneebone is putting satellite tags on thresher sharks. Oh, we have to talk about sea turtles too?
Yeah.
Yes, we put satellite tags on sea turtles. No, go ahead, I'll let you.
Yeah, it's a great question. And the bottom line is we use a full range of tags. And these technologies are getting smaller and more sophisticated as time goes on. There's still progress to be made in the manufacturers having monopolies to some degree, and they're pricey, these tags, and the more functionality they have, the pricier they are. But we're hoping that some of the quirks continue to get worked out because they're really important in terms of the ocean is in 3 dimensions, we have to remember, and we can't see through it. We can't monitor where these animals are. It's vast and massive, and it's like a needle in a haystack, even if you know where the animal's supposed to be. So you have no idea what happens once these animals leave you, and we have to be able to evaluate risk and evaluate mortality. And ultimately, just want to make it clear, we're evaluating survival because if there is mortality, we want to reduce it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, in the front.
I spent some time on Jekyll Island, and they have a fabulous small sea turtle rescue station down there. Do you ever get sea turtles from other areas up and down
Yeah.
the Atlantic coast?
You want to take that one, John?
Sure, the question is, are we getting other sea turtles up and down the coast? Meaning, are we getting them to rehab them? Is that the question? Yeah, that's a great question. So more regionally, we get such an influx, especially in the last 5-6 years. We've seen some record numbers of Kemp's Ridleys specifically, but other species, as Vicky noted, also other sea turtle species coming in as well. And Kemp's Ridley is an endangered species. So are greens, so are leatherbacks. We don't get them at our sea turtle hospital, but leatherbacks, we do a lot of research out on the ocean looking at entanglement and fishing gear, just like the same thing that happens to right whales. Leatherbacks get entangled. So we do get some occasional animals from way down the coast, but mostly our partners are on the Cape. They get overflow in their facilities, and we have a bigger facility. So we take a bunch in, and we have all these established partnerships with Audubon and others where they're triaging on the beach, they're working with our people, they're sending turtles to us, and then we're doing the clinical intervention for, in some cases, months afterwards before we re-release them. Sometimes those releases are happening in New England, sometimes they're happening down south in the Carolinas, sometimes they go as far as Florida. We've flown them there, we've trucked them there, we've done all kinds of things. So, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we have probably the most elite exotic veterinary researcher in the world at our institution, Dr. Charlie Innes, he's probably the foremost expert on sea turtle health and physiology in the world. And we are getting such an incredible opportunity with these animals to learn about their health, medicine. We do this with other species too, but sea turtles is a real specialty, and we publish that work very prolifically through Charlie and get them out. So we're having an impact on the operations and rescue for many other aquariums and rehab centers around the world.
As I've watched Chatham get more and more great whites from none to maybe 10 years ago, they got 5 juveniles, and now we got lots of them. When the young guys go back in the winter to the middle of the Atlantic, how do they tell the big mamas that there's good eating here in Nantucket? I've been fascinated to understand, how do these great whites communicate?
Great, interesting question about how white sharks might signal to each other that there's a buffet waiting for them on the outer cape and the islands.
Any ideas?
Yeah. I don't think they have to communicate to each other at all about it. I think when you think about how does any predator in the ocean find its prey, first of all, they move around a lot more than we would expect. Especially, a lot of these sharks are swimming constantly from the moment they're born to the moment they die. So if you're going to swim constantly, to cover a lot of ground, all you have to do is stay pointed in one direction. So I think they're covering a lot of ground, and their seals are smelly, and they figure out over time, they detect prey items in some places and not others. But and eventually they figure it out, and they're very smart about coming back to the places where they.
It seems as if a natural absorption, which is really what you just described, doesn't quite get it when you start out with less than a handful one summer, and now a few years later we've got so many. Is that really a natural absorption?
Yeah, so it's a great question, but just to maybe provide a little more context there. We saw a white shark off on the Sean Island that was caught in a salt marsh in 2004. So that's about 18 years ago. But we've been seeing prolific numbers of white sharks on the outer Cape, Chatham, now for, I guess it's probably about 14, 15 years. Like, it's crept up. And the last decade, it's been really consistent. So I haven't necessarily seen, not sure if you're talking about the juveniles, because that's interesting. That's really interesting. But the adults, we've seen repeatedly come back again and again and again. And I think it's the combination of the food source and also hospitable temperatures for their habitat, and the fact, again, that they've recovered. But we're seeing mostly animals that are 5, 10 years old and above. And so they've been around for a while. It's not like they just were born this year and deciphered that there was food. Although we are learning more about nursery grounds for the species. Off Long Island, for example, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that on the outer tip of Long Island, there's juvenile white sharks that are being born somewhere around there. But it's a great question. I think Nick covered it really well. I think it's more learning from them individually, and the fact that the carrying capacity of the population has gone up so much, and you've got these rogue individuals coming in and checking things out. Also, we're looking for them more. So to Nick's earlier point, we weren't looking 15 years ago. We didn't have spotter pilots up in the air every day like we do now with the state and the Conservancy's work. So with that happening, law of probability, you're just going to see more, and then boaters know about it, mariners know about it. I've been next to a white shark in the water. If I didn't know it was right there, you would never know it's there. We see the occasional breaching now, or not really breaching, but feeding. Otherwise, it's a needle in a haystack still. So the spotter pilots are key to us knowing that, and now we know people are also looking for them and getting that information out there. So they might have been there all along, is my point, to some degree.
I would just add one more thing, which is that some of the sharks that have been tagged here off the Cape have, within less than a year, have covered the entire East Coast all the way down to the tip of Florida, and then into the Gulf of Mexico, up in the northern Gulf of Mexico in the middle of the summer. I've been involved in projects where we've tagged a white shark off of Jacksonville, Florida, that swam across the Mid-Atlantic Ridge at one point, and was closer to France than Florida, where it started. They visit Bermuda. So when you're covering that much ground in a year or less, you're gonna figure out, where if there's like some place where there's hundreds of seals, you're probably gonna stumble upon it, at some point.
Yeah, and they may be following each other too. That's something else. We know them as solitary animals, but there may be some sort of group behavior that we don't yet fully understand.
So one here.
I have a question about that, because at some point this spring, there were 3 sharks on one whale carcass in Madigan Harbor.
Yeah, so whenever the point was there was a whale carcass being preyed upon, and whenever you have a dead marine mammal, it's like, I don't know, dinner bell. Yeah, for sure. It's name your favorite buffet. They're going to come, and it's not just white sharks. We've got great aerial footage from our aerial survey team of blue sharks and other species foraging on those same carcasses. It's gold, and they don't have to actually exert energy tracking a live animal or trying to outmaneuver a live animal.
In the back. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, what about the Greenland shark that they spotted in the Caribbean? That's fascinating because I guess it comes from the Arctic. Like there they found it in the Caribbean. And it's this ancient species apparently that lives for like 2.5 centuries, which is fascinating. I didn't think that sharks could live that long.
Yeah, the maximum estimate is could be over 400 years for some of those species, or for some of those individual Greenland sharks. Yeah, I had not heard about them being seen in the Caribbean.
Yeah, so there was one sighting of one from a very, 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 very super deep survey. And deeper you go, even in the Gulf of Mexico, it's really cold. But I heard some debate genetically that might not have been a Greenland shark. That might have been a different species that was similar. It might have been mistaken as it might have been a gulper shark or something that lives in that region more regularly. But either way, we do get rogue animals that can cope with different temperatures that sometimes surprise us, even like orcas that we've seen off the Cape and Islands at times. So not completely unprecedented. And when you go deep, you might as well be that deep. We're talking about like 1,000 meters, I think it was. So that's like 3,000 feet deep.
We had a question, the black t-shirt, yeah.
So kind of about the tracking of sharks and everything, kind of two that leads into one. So first being, are you guys finding that any sharks that you do catch around here are coming back year after year? And then if that is the case, are you able to do like any genetic data to see if families of them come back or their pups come back at all?
So the question was, are any of the sharks we're tagging coming back year after year? And if so, are we able to do any genetic sampling and figure out if there's related families or populations? I guess the short answer is yes. Some of the sharks that we've tagged, we do know. Some of them were very early. So like Caroline's work, she's been putting out acoustic tags starting last year. And those sharks would have come back this year and being detected on our receivers, the few that we have out. And so we'll find out when we download those. The sand tiger sharks that we've been tagging in Boston Harbor have definitely, some of those have come back year after year. The white sharks definitely come back repeatedly off the Cape. So yeah, I think it's pretty common for that to happen. As far as the genetic sampling goes, it depends on what question you're asking. So you could take a genetic sample to figure out if population is genetically distinct from, say, white sharks that are found off Florida. We already know they're not distinct because we've seen the tracks of them going back and forth. But that's one thing you can do with that. We don't have any, I don't think we have any genetic studies going on with sharks.
Not presently. We've done some with skates though. We've been involved in some studies with thorny skates, which is an endangered species that's protected. But I don't think we have any active with sharks. One neat story though that I'll share. We were doing a video with a Nat Geo guy, Andy Mann, a couple years ago, and we checked a receiver right off Quincy in Massachusetts. We're talking Boston Harbor, like in little estuaries that are a couple feet deep. And we caught a sand tiger. Nick alluded to the sand tigers that had been at that same exact spot with that same exact receiver the year prior. but we had evidence that went all the way down the coast to Delaware Bay. And then it not only came back, but it came back to that same spot, which happened to be right like in close proximity to a CVS that you could literally see like over your left shoulder.
Yeah.
Talk about urban ocean and urban shark. That is the ultimate urban shark. It's kind of disturbing actually when you think about it. But yeah, that was a great example. We've seen a number of those with individual sharks we've tagged.
Right here in the back, yeah. You're the one, yeah.
Are there any sharks in Nantucket Harbor? And also, how do you catch a shark?
Oh.
Question is, are there any sharks in Nantucket Harbor and how do you catch them? And that sounds like a great question for our friend Caroline. Take the stage.
Yes, there are sharks in Nantucket Harbor. No, we have not caught nurse sharks up here. Those are warmer water species that maybe eventually we may see coming up here, but that would be big news. You can ask Nick all about nurse sharks. He's a nurse shark expert. So I have personally seen individuals catch sandbar sharks from Brant Point. We do have a receiver in the harbor, hopefully listening for some of those sharks. And how we catch a shark is we just put out a chunk of bluefish on a rod and reel with a circle hook. We follow regulations, and circle hooks are safer for sharks than J hooks. And we just throw it out and wait. And ideally the shark comes along and takes that bait and that hook successfully. We have times where they just take the bait and we just don't have any bait left. And then we fight it on the rod and reel and bring it over to the side of the boat and basically lasso it, measure, tag it, and release it. And we always take the hook out when we release it. And if it's gonna harm the jaw, we cut the hook out so that it won't harm the jaw.
We had one in the back, and then we'll go to the front here. Yeah.
John, Nick, thank you. One of you mentioned what you described as the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than anywhere else on the planet. I feel like we could talk a little bit more about that. Can you just say why that's happening and what it means, particularly for species that aren't enjoying warmer water as much as the sharks seem to?
So the question relates to the warming in the Gulf of Maine and maybe the causation of that. So I won't get into the deep complexities. There's actually an awesome video on YouTube if you into stuff like that and search. It's a combination of climate change, the circulation of the currents that are coming off down into the Bay of Fundy up north, and the shape of the Gulf of Maine. But none of this would be happening if it wasn't for global warming and climate change. And we're also seeing evidence of acidification in the region as well, which is affecting shellfish integrity and many other things. But to your question, so it's not it's the rate of warming that's unprecedented. And because of that shift, we're seeing massive changes in oceanographic pattern. We're seeing things like plankton shift in distribution, and a lot of things eat plankton. Nick noted a couple of shark species that eat plankton, basking sharks, whale sharks. We care a lot about the North Atlantic right whale. That feeds on copepods. The copepods distribution is shifting significantly due to warming in the Gulf of Maine. They are then moving into different areas, and the biggest threats to them are fishing entanglements and ship strikes. And we've seen unprecedented numbers of those because they were showing up in areas to follow their food that we weren't ready for. Not we, being the aquarium or the people in this room, but people in general up in Canadian waters. So many species are shifting up. We saw a sailfish caught in the Cape Cod Canal a few years ago. That was never a species that we ever saw up here. We have black sea bass occurring way up north of Cape Cod. That was never a north of Cape Cod species. Our research station up in the Bay of Fundy, we have a Lubec, Maine field station. We're seeing rates of mola, ocean sunfish, and basking sharks up there that we've never seen in the past because it's warmer. So anyway, there's a lot of things changing, and the Gulf of Maine is hot. It's bathtub.
We had this gentleman in the front.
Wondering, can you identify the shark at First Point? About the time the Wren house burned and the ranger Brent saw it. Did you identify that one? It was all First Point. He cited it and reported it. And this is the same time we saw a couple out at Great Point about the same time. They, pretty sure one of those is Great White. Did you hear about that?
Can you repeat
Yeah.
the question?
Sure. Do you want to just repeat that question? I didn't catch the whole thing because you were facing the other way. Sorry.
I'm trying to figure out what shark was at the point. I thought they were
which shark was at the point identified, so this was 3 or 4 days ago?
Yeah, it was to answer the question whether there's sharks in the harbor.
Oh, I see.
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The question is about sharks in the harbor and whether one particular animal that was spotted 3 or 4 days ago was identified and whether Caroline knew that ID, and it seems she doesn't.
Yeah, this is a little bit longer than that.
Okay. It was probably a sandbar shark. It could have been another one of these species we mentioned earlier that we've been seeing more frequently. Yeah.
We were thinking, but he's a pretty good eye and experience. Thank you.
We have time for a couple more.
Yeah,
questions, I
a
think.
couple more. So let's do the gentleman here and then the girl on the end. Yeah.
Thank you. So both of you have sort of cited two reasons for the increased number of sharks in the area. One is conservation efforts, increase in the food supply, but also warming waters. Do you have any opinion about which one of those two is more a factor in what we're seeing?
So the question is, based on the notion that warming waters and conservation winds and food supply are the basis for seeing more sharks in nearshore waters, which one may weigh out or may weigh more important in those two? That's such a good question. I honestly don't have an answer. I feel like it's so species dependent. It's so context dependent. I think very broadly, those are the primary factors. That and the fact that we're also, again, looking for them more and seeing them more, and there's more easy transmission of that information, which is not obviously a factor in their abundance. I don't know, Nick, if you have any thoughts on what might win out between those?
No, I think you said it exactly right. It's very hard to figure out one or the other. And then, yeah, I would add in so hard to separate all of it from just sampling bias and everyone with a smart. If sharks had not increased at all in the last 20 years, it would still feel like they had, just because every sighting is documented. It's like, man, more sharks on the South Shore. They closed the beach again, and all of that kind of thing. So I think it's very tricky to tease those things apart.
Last question here at the end.
I was just curious about what you guys are doing to track the right whale population. Is it similar to that with the sharks and turtles, and then also just what the overall health of the population is?
Yeah. The point earlier, there are less than 350 animals left. And the reason we know that, the aquarium's been, as Vicki noted earlier, we started our right whale research program in 1981 in the Bay of Fundy. We've since done many, many things in support of right whale conservation through our science. One of those things is that we maintain a catalog in our shop that documents photo-specific identification of every single individual. And we have relationships with so many different research groups that they feed that information to the catalog. It's part of a consortium of many different groups, including industry groups that are working together to try to safeguard the species. We don't tag them. There are some studies going on around the world that are trying to tag large cetaceans, large whales. But the problem is that when you attach a tag, you obviously can't perform surgery on a large whale like we were talking about with Caroline and her sandbar sharks, boat side. Or even on a boat with very small animals. We can bring them on with our sea turtles. We can do things with them. You can't do that with a whale. You can harpoon a tag on them, but if it goes into their blubber, there's evidence to suggest that they develop infection and that pathology could be damaging or lethal, or the tag is going to detach very quickly and yield very less meaningful data. So the way that we track them is, as I mentioned earlier, through the air. We do aerial surveys. We also do boat-based surveys in the known right whale habitats, including areas south of the islands. We did a winter survey this year formally for the first time ever because of the fact that we're not seeing them in many of the traditional areas we used to see them in. So that's why we're doing the science, to go back to your point earlier. We're doing the science so that we can figure out exactly where they are, and we have more precision than a seasonal estimate on where they are. That's the whole point of the research and the science. And I think that would help us better manage and protect, construct turbines in a more seasonal manner, or not even a seasonal manner, but certain times of day, for example, certain times of month that we might be able to. I will also just end by saying that the population's 336. We've seen dips in the population way down in the past, and then it's bounced back. And if not for protective efforts, we may not have a right whale anymore now anyway. So even though it seems like there's very few, we still have a lot of hope. Ocean conservation is a people business. We need to get people to behave differently and act differently, not the animals. They're going to do what they do. We need to have people behave differently. We still have a lot of hope for ocean health and conservation by working with different groups, by balancing use of the ocean. The right whale is a great example of that.
Well, thank you. Oh, one more? Okay, right here in the front. Yeah.
I read a book a number of years ago, and I'm trying to wrap my mind the name of it. It was something like War of the Whales. It was a study that I think Ken Balcom did down in the Bahamas, and the big Bahamian Mona Trench or something down there. And there, at that time, there were a number of, I guess, naval sonar explosions, the testing site down there, and found that it really damaged the both for the whales, all the cetacean, their ear. Sonar.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about how that's
Yes.
continuing to affect?
Well, you may have heard over recent years, oil and gas exploration, proposals for oil and gas exploration, which require seismic. And that's akin to, I think that's what you're talking about. And some of the seismic activity, yes, can be very damaging to whales. Our group at the aquarium has actually published a number of papers on sublethal, meaning non-fatal, impacts from different noise emissions. And that's a big reason why we have to be careful around pile driving activities with these wind turbines and doing it at very specific times, not us, but the developers, because there is potential damage for things that are in close proximity. Seismic is not, we are definitely against seismic activity in any context. And it's not just whales that are damaged by that. I mean, we have a sonic seascape out there. There's a lot of noise out there in the ocean. And that noise propagates really, really well and moves well. That's good if you're, doing things that require sound. It's not good for the animals. Many of them echolocate. Many of them are dependent upon that communicating with each other. And that's not just whales, that's fish. Atlantic cod are a species that reproduce by coming together in these incredible aggregations and using sound to communicate with each other. So anyway, seismic is a bad activity for these animals, and we certainly are hoping that there's not a lot more of that moving forward.
Sorry, can I just add one thing to the right whale question? John mentioned the catalog that we maintain, and I just mentioned this because we all do, but we work with some of these people, and they maintain this catalog where we know the identity of every right whale, and we know the history of them. And so every time one of those right whales dies, for the people studying them, they're very analytical, very scientific, but that's a very personal loss for them. In many cases, they've known that animal its entire life. They know who that animal's mother was. They've seen it survive entanglements and other things. I've joked that they're so passionate, if like one of them won $100 million in the lottery, they would come to work the next day and say, how can I donate $100 million to right whale conservation? They wouldn't, quit like a lot of people would. They're great scientists, but it's also they're very passionate. It's very personal to them. And I wouldn't, I'd put their passion for right whale conservation up against anybody.
So thank you all for coming. Thank you for the great questions.
Thank you.
I'm thinking maybe you'll stick around for a few minutes.
Yeah,
Just if there are
yeah.
any last minute
Yeah,
questions
absolutely.
or things you're thinking about. We're going to be here for a little bit, but on behalf of the Athenaeum, we thank you for attending tonight, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the Geschke series next summer. Thanks.
Thank you.